It's the rocking, shocking, new wave of horror. Howling II.
Welcome to Hogtown Haunts. This week, we're digging into the sequel to the 1981 hit, The Howling, aptly named Howling II. Strange that for the sequels, they dropped the word "the" from the title. Ben, brother of Karen White from the first movie, meets both Jenny Templeton, one of Karen's colleagues, and Stefan Krosko at Karen's funeral. He's confronted with the fact that his sister was a werewolf, as happens from time to time. Determined to seek revenge, they set out on a journey to Transylvania to eradicate the werewolf menace. Together they embark on a perilous quest to confront the leader of the werewolves, Stirba, who is hell-bent on achieving world domination. But as they get closer to their goal, they find themselves drawn deeper into the dark, supernatural world of the werewolves, and must face new dangers at every turn. So join Ben, Jenny, and Stefan on their battle against the forces of darkness, and prepare yourself for a journey into the darkest corners of the human imagination. Kinda. Look, here at Hogtown Haunts, we're going to cover a lot of movies that didn't hit their mark upon release. And we're even going to cover some movies that never managed to hit their mark, despite having the benefit of time and attitudes changing.
Don't let him get away!
This movie falls in between a lot of variables, in a lot of ways. That's why it's a classic. When you look up cult favorite, you just might find the poster to this movie in the dictionary. It's got that "it's so bad it's good" vibe that you just can't replicate without a low budget and a crew ready to deal with just about any inconvenience with a can-do attitude and some duct tape. It also helps if you can get a legendary horror star to appear. Christopher Lee, I'm looking at you. It has actors with cult status, it has music with cult status, and it has werewolves in monkey suits. It's a movie with multiple titles, always helpful for a movie to gain cult status. And it's got a fan base out there, praising it on message boards, ensuring it stays relevant in some fashion. I love the first movie. It's up there near the top of my favorite werewolf movies. I've always wanted to watch the other Howling movies, there are 8, and a possible reboot happening. The reboot might be directed by Andy Muschietti, of It fame. As far as I can tell, they're still in the negotiating process. Point being, The Howling still holds status within the horror community. Not a surprise if you're engaged at all in that community. I remember catching some of Howling II late at night on Cinemax, as a young teenage boy in the 80s was prone to do, standing near the television, listening to see if the parents had woken up, ready to change the channel. And I remember being unimpressed. Now, quoting myself from 5 minutes ago, with the benefit of time and attitudes changing, I really dig the sequel. What I didn't know until recently was that The Howling was based on a novel, and that the novelist, Gary Bradner, wasn't too impressed with the first movie, but was brought in to consult on this, the first sequel. There are 3 books in the series, and I feel compelled to read them now. Production and cast. Philippe Mora is one of those directors that you want to ask, how did you find yourself knee-deep in Howling II? The only thing similar to this movie in his catalog is, wait for it, Howling III, The Marsupials. Otherwise, his career spans some pretty important documentaries, Swatsika, and Brother Can You Spare a Dime, for instance. Movie-wise, he's very eclectic. Drama, history, science fiction, and more. One of the more interesting offerings has got to be The Return of Captain Invincible, also with Christopher Lee. Another notable movie is Communion, the 1989 movie based on his friend Whitley Strieber's book about an alien abduction. I know during my teen years, I swear I saw this book everywhere, in just about every checkout line or paperback book rack that was available. That alien head with those big eyes looking back at you? Shivers. Now, how does someone like Christopher Lee find himself in this movie? He's noted as saying, "You know, dear boy, I've just done vampire films. I've never done a werewolf movie, and I need to add that to my resume." To which I'd say, be careful what you wish for. I'm guessing this movie solved that problem on many levels. I've read that Lee was so unhappy with his co-star's acting that he would close his eyes and wish he were somewhere else. While after watching this movie, I can agree with him, I just can't find actual evidence of him saying this. If you can confirm, please share it in the comments below. I don't know if Christopher Lee needs any introduction. Dracula, Sauron, Count Dooku, along with prominent roles in James Bond, which Ian Fleming has noted is based on Christopher Lee. He appeared in The Man with the Golden Gun as hitman Francisco Scaramanga. He was in Sleepy Hollow and Gremlins 2, the superior Gremlins, if you ask me. Side note, Gremlins 2 was directed by Joe Dante, the director of the first Howling, and it's recorded that Christopher apologized for his involvement personally on the first day of filming for appearing in Howling II. I don't know if it's that bad, but at the time, I'm sure it didn't go over that well. Something of note here, however, is his history with the filming location. When the crew landed in Prague, there was a military parade. Moira questioned who the honors were for, and Christopher said, "That's for me, dear boy. I'm a war hero here." He likes saying dear boy a lot, I guess. Not much is known about his time in the military. The records are sealed. He was part of Churchill's secret army, so that makes sense. But you can safely add Nazi Hunter to his list of credits, since he had a role in the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, architect of the Holocaust. Moira had this to say about Lee. In all these horror movies, he had all the gravitas, because he'd seen terrible things, and done them too, as anyone had in intelligence in World War II. But like all heroes, he never talked about it. Speaking of Nazi hunters, before we had this Captain America, we had this Captain America. The 1979 film would even have a sequel of its own. I remember watching them as a child, and still thinking they looked cheesy. But good cheese, you know.
Be Captain America, Steve.
Reb Brown, born Robert Edward Brown, but since another actor already had that name, he became Reb, R-E-B, Robert Edward Brown. Can we talk about how quintessentially American they made Reb Brown in this? Blonde hair, covered in denim, holding a gun, sometimes cleaning it during a conversation, for a good 80% of the time. Guesstimating here. It could be just a few moments, but it really seems to be something they were hammering in as the movie goes on. It's always said that Reb was a football player turned actor, but he really was quite a jock, according to his website, which I recommend you visit. I'll put the link in the notes. Reb was recruited by 64 universities to play college football, as well as UC Santa Barbara for baseball. Most notably, Reb seems to be remembered for Yor, the Hunter from the Future, based on the Argentinian comic of the same name. I'd try to describe it here, but it's probably better left to be seen on one's own. Let's not forget Space Mutiny, yet another movie with Reb that has a cult following. Now, Annie McEnroe is one of those actors you'll recognize from just a bunch of other things. Snow Beast, a TV movie from 1977 that definitely deserves your time. There's a decidedly not as enjoyable remake from 2011 with John Schneider. Watch at your own risk. She was also in movies like Wall Street, Beetlejuice, and True Stories. Marsha Hunt. Another person on this list that would be difficult to recap in just a few moments. Their career had so many twists and turns. Activist, author, actor, musician, model, editor, novelist, and possible inspiration for the Rolling Stones song, Brown Sugar. Marsha has claimed credit to that, as has another woman, and I might believe Marsha, as she does have a child with Mick Jagger. Talking movies, however, Marsha was in Dracula AD 1972 with Christopher Lee, as well as Never Say Never Again, the James Bond movie. A lot of Bond connections here. Probably last on this list of who's who from Howling II is Sybil Danning. Sybil found her success in a lot of B movies. Battle from Beyond the Stars for one, the Roger Corman and early James Cameron film. She also starred in Hercules, Malibu Express, and Reform School Girls. Took me about 15 times to say that right. Reform School Girls was also directed by Tom DeSimone, who brought us Hell Night. She suffered a spinal disc herniation in 1990 and took quite a bit of time off after that. More recently, she's been seen in Werewolf Women of the SS, the trailer from the Grindhouse films with Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez. I was going to show some of the scenes here from the trailer, but she's half naked, whipping other naked women, and I don't know how YouTube would feel about that. But it's out there for your viewing, if you're so inclined. Howling II is one of those movies that, when I posted I was watching it, the fan base chimed in. I received quite a few messages about how much it's loved. It's not a good movie by any means, and I feel like fans will appreciate that opinion because, well, it's true. I mean, they were using secondhand ape costumes with extra hair glued onto them, because they were using old costumes from the television show The Planet of the Apes. There's so much to love about this movie. It has an almost Hammer-esque vibe to it, or maybe it's just because Christopher Lee and his charismatic presence helps to deliver that vibe. Either or, I picked up on it. Combine that with the new wave vibes of Babel, a band made specifically for the film by Stephen W. Parsons, Chris Pye, Simon Etchell, and Steve Young. Not that Steve Young. They were given just 48 hours to produce the single, The Howling. They had written other music for other scenes, but production hammered The Howling and decided to include some more traditional background music instead. There is a soundtrack out there. I couldn't find it on any streaming services though. It's a catchy little tune, thankfully, because when I say they hammered the song, they really just loaded it up and hit repeat. It bears well to remember that Prague was communist at the time, and so shooting issues arrived all the time. The concert scenes, for instance, caused quite a bit of trouble. They were performing at night, when concerts were relegated to daytime. Concert goers were also supposed to sit politely and not act like they're at an actual concert. So the crowd surfing we see in this movie was apparently frowned upon. I always like to mention themes when it comes to horror movies. They usually have a lot to say about whatever's going on in our world. But The Howling II, though, doesn't have an overt message. It's kind of interesting that a community of very sexual, free-thinking werewolves are hiding in a communist country in the middle of the Cold War. There's a lot to unpack there. Though it's an unintentional comparison, as the city in the movie isn't portrayed as communist, I'd say the undertones are still relevant, but you'd only get them if you decided to dig a little deeper and find out more about the production. I could also make the argument that the werewolf hunters seem very straight-laced, and the werewolves obviously are not. So there's that recurring 80s theme of bucking the establishment. I might be giving the movie too much credit at this point, but as a creative person myself, I know you're saying something when you're making art, and I do consider this movie art. And for a moment, let's go back to the sexual nature of these werewolves. There's a three-way orgiastic scene that is so over-the-top deep throat blushed. One wonders how sexual it would have been had the makeup and costumes allowed for more movement. The glued-on hair kept rubbing off, so the actors were relegated to just writhing against each other and hissing. No recap about this movie is complete until the end credits are mentioned. I can't show you them here, but imagine it. Prague, 1985. The end credits start to roll, and you're hit with Babel singing The Howling, yet again, and then Sybil Danning ripping off her top 17 times. Apparently the original cut showed the scene more than 17 times, and it was only after she complained that she wasn't happy that they decided to trim it down to the 17 still in the movie. I mean, I'm gay, and those end credits still do something for me. Also, you can definitely see the influence of MTV on this movie. I don't know what else to say about this film. If you haven't seen it, go do so right now. If you have seen it, it might be time to watch it again. It's a slice of life straight from the 80s. Sex, communism, denim, guns, and werewolves. Give it a go.